and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. I am Lisa, and I am your host this week. And I am joined today by Tandy. Hello, Tandy.
Hello.
And Katie. Hello, Katie.
Hello.
So before we dive into today's, we think fun topic, and it's going to be a slightly technical one, so a bit of a hint there. Do want to give you the heads up, the usual like, subscribe, share. First of all, thank you for following us on all of the different socials. We are on Twitter still for now. We'll see. We are on Mastodon. We are on YouTube. We are on Facebook. We are on TikTok. We are everywhere. We are at Beer Ladies Pod in most of the places, except Facebook. Then you can just search. Just search. There's a box. Just search. So we are findable, but first of all, thank you for that. But then excited about today because we have one that feels both very objective and very subjective, because today we want to talk about off flavors in beer. Woo! So we definitely want to make sure that we're covering this from both kind of the nerdy home brewing angle, but also just looking at it from a kind of, how do you identify these things when you're out and about? Hopefully you're not finding them when you're out and about in a bar, but sometimes things happen. So with that said, we'll go around and do a what you drinking. And I will say, not all of these have off flavors. Most of these do not have off flavors, but we do have a secret one with an off flavors. So first, Katie, over to you. What have you got tonight?
Well, the beer I decided to drink, Lisa, is Outer Place Brewing Say a Little Prayer.
Oh, very nice.
Ooh.
What style is that, Katie?
This is, so I'll read the blurb. Say a Little Prayer is a special white double IPA brewed with orange peel, coriander seed, and 2 yeasts, hopped with Amarillo, Cryo, and Eldorado. Brewed and canned in Dublin.
Very nice.
And it tastes, it's a stranger flavor. It's nice. It's a pleasant flavor, not an off flavor in any way, shape, or form. And I've seen Outer Place brewing beers around the place, and I managed to pick up a few over Christmas, and yeah, it's quite pleasant. And I will say, I was going to drink another beer, but there was a line in its description of the beer. I'm going to read it to you, and you can tell me what I'm not going to say what the beer is, but at the end of it, it just goes, a unisex results for even the ones who are not really into beers. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And like in the context, they're clearly trying to say that this beer will please even non-beer drinkers. But why did they have to put unisex in there?
It's so strange.
If you're not a beer drinker, it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, or anything, any other identifier. If you're just not a beer drinker, so what? I find that very strange.
I also find it extremely strange. But anyway, I said I'd go with this one. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's not a unisex beer. It's a beer for all.
Exactly. And I'm holding off on getting to Tandy's because I know she's got something special for us. But I have, again, a very normal beer. I have a Galway Bay Ale, which is their red ale. The only reason I did pick a red ale for the evening is sometimes you can get a metallic off flavor, but it can also be a perfectly acceptable flavor in a red ale, depending on kind of how hardcore it is. So I think that is one of the things we want to talk a little bit about, is when is an off flavor not an off flavor? When is an off flavor actually a good thing? And does it depend on the style? How do you know it? Is it art or pornography? Do you know it when you see it or taste it or smell it? So there's that to get in there. And we will certainly get into some of that. But Tandy, you have something special for us tonight.
Right, I have got 2 beers tonight. On the side that I'm hoping has no off flavors, and the one that I'm really planning to enjoy, and I'm sure I will, is this one. It's from Level Beer out in Oregon.
Oh.
And it's a fresh hopped lager. So it's fresh hopped, and I mean we spoke about this in our previous Lingo Series #1, I think. So when you're adding the hops that have just come off the vine into a beer, that's called fresh hopped or wet hopped, depending on who you talk to. And I find it interesting because normally you find fresh hopped IPAs, pale ales, or just hop forward beers, but this is a lager, and in fact it's a Czech style Pilsner.
Oh,
fresh hopped. So I'm interested. I'm interested. I'll have a taste anyway.
Excellent.
Oh, it is. Even though I've actually had it for a couple of months and I probably should have drank it fresh, it does taste very fresh. It's lovely.
Excellent.
Good job, Level Beer.
Nice.
But since we are now talking off flavors, and off flavors don't affect big breweries alone, they affect home brewers, and home brewers are the ones that really benefit from this kind of education and knowledge. I thought I'd put all the cards out there and show you that I've been brewing on and off for 10 years, and I have a beer that I know for a fact has got some off flavors because I have opened 2 of the bottles and have not been able to take more than half a sip. It's just, and you know what? That's sometimes it's a bit of a risk when brewing. Not every beer is going to be maybe to your tastes or delicious or how you planned it, but you also can have these things that go wrong in the brew day. And I'll tell you what went wrong on this brew day, besides probably everything, but I had to change the recipe halfway through, not the brew, but halfway through my day, because I got sent the wrong yeast for the style that I was going to brew. So I kind of made this one up on the fly with ingredients that I had and yeast that I had. But we're gonna open this one, right? And I'm gonna describe it. And I think that if we can get to a diagnosis by the end of the episode, that'd be really helpful because I have not been brave enough to actually sit down and do a full, BJCP kind of run through of it so that I can diagnose my own beer. So I needed some moral support for this one.
Definitely.
There we are.
And, even bad beers, you can learn something from it, and they're possibly salvageable in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll get into that a little bit. I think we'll also do a sort of compare contrast because I have here the Brewer's Companion. And for those who are not watching this, just listening at home, this is the edition from, I think, 1994. And some of the things in this, when it comes to off flavors and how to fix them, are either off flavors we don't talk about anymore, or are off flavors that are now good because that's changed, or the how we might fix them. They're just weird in a fun way, but we'll get into that. But I think time has moved on, and some of these things have changed very quickly, and others have been with us for a very, very, very long time. But I don't know, before we get into that, Teddy, do you want to open it now and tell us what it looks like? And
okay,
let's see what happens.
So I'll tell you what it was meant to be. Even though it wasn't meant to be a red ale, by the time I'd rejigged my recipe based on the yeast that I had and the ingredients and hops that I had, it turned out like it might be a red ale, right? So I'm going to pour it now, and I'm going to show those who are listening or watching on YouTube. I'm going to pour quite a lot. Now it looks really dark on camera. Mm-hmm. If I put it up to the light, actually, it has got some red in it. Oh, shite. It's okay. Okay, so you see
there's a bit of red. Yeah.
Quite a ruby to it. It's got like a ruby sort of color in it. So it is quite red, even though it looks very dark. First problem, which is not necessarily an off flavor, but the head is min to none. There's very little of it. It didn't, when I poured, and I did try and pour quite vigorously, it didn't give me a decent head and then settle. It just didn't really form it. So that's already one thing to diagnose. It might mean that I undercarbed or, didn't put enough sugar in when I was bottle conditioning it. That's okay. It could also come down to ingredients. But let's give it a smell and a taste, because that's really where the off flavors are going to come in. Jesus. Now,
a great beginning.
Ooh. Okay. It smells like antiseptic.
Oh.
Yep. It's medicinal antiseptic. It's
mouthwashy.
Yes, less like minty than mouthwashy, but it's like a chloroseptic. So now I'm glad that I got that straight away now, because medicinal is a very unfortunate off flavor in beer, and it's often got to do with either using water that's got chlorine that you didn't remove, or you didn't treat the water, or it's often got to do with cleansers and sanitizers that haven't been rinsed properly. Now, that is probably exactly what happened, but it can also be, by the way, just for anybody listening, it can also be, if you're using a lot of darker grains, The husks of those darker grains can cause this kind of flavor sometimes. It's like an astringency or a dryness that comes from the husk of certain malts. And then the other very obvious one is an infection of some or other variety. Now, the infection can come during the brew day, or it can come during bottling or kegging, as you were. And so I would have to now go and look at where in my process did I potentially have an infection. Jesus, it's grim. But I am going to taste it, for science. Science.
And this is why you take notes. This is why you record what you're doing, so you can go back and see, okay, we did this. What's the verdict? It's not a happy face, folks. It's not a happy face, but it is funny because the real pungency of the off flavor is more on the nose. I can taste the red ale underneath it, like I really can. But it's got a strange it's not a puckering and it's not a sourness, but there is a strange, and I think it is that sort of chlorophenolic or medicinal character to it that you get, and then you can taste the malts, the caramels in it too. So it's just an unfortunate one, really, this one. Oh, that is a shame.
I'm bummed.
But like you say, there are a couple of key things it could be. So that at least gives you a little bit. And now I'm curious though too, because I think we want to get into this a little bit, because my sort of nemesis off flavor is that sort of phenolic Band-Aid. Like I get the Band-Aid, like to me it's very, very, very strong, even if it's just there a tiny bit. So I can have a beer that most people think tastes absolutely fine, and I will pick it up and just zero in on it. And I've had it recently. I'm not going to say who from, not even going to say what country I was in, but from beers I normally like or styles I normally like. And I do sometimes notice it with, a combination with certain hops and just certain, so sometimes it's not even necessarily that it's wrong, but something is bringing out that flavor for me. But that said, like, if we sort of back up and talk about what brings it out, because like you're saying, it can be, the kind of sterilizer you're using, or maybe things aren't rinsed enough. But I know you can also get just like, sometimes the yeast doesn't do everything you wanted it to do, and you already knew you had this kind of yeast mismatch. I wonder if maybe that's where you would start to think, oh, was it maybe the wrong kind of yeast for, not like you said, just what you wanted to do, but maybe wrong temperature, just didn't want to be there. I wonder if that's one place to start.
And can I ask, Tandy, was it that you opened the yeast the morning and you'd already started your brewing and you realized then, or did you realize a few days in advance and try and rejig something?
No, so what happened is that I was going to brew, I think I was going to brew a pale ale or an IPA, one of these ones. I hadn't brewed a lot of hoppy beers because I'm bottle conditioning at the moment. I don't have a keg system because I don't really have the space for it right now. But and when you bottle condition hoppy beers, sometimes that hop character fades a lot quicker than what it does when you keg conditioning and force carbonating. So I've deliberately stayed away from hoppy beers because of that. Anyway, I was going to do a somewhat hoppier beer, just a pale ale probably, but can't remember. But what I realized is that I'd already mashed in, so all of my ingredients were in, okay? And then I realized I had the wrong kind of yeast. So instead of having a sort of clean yeast that would show off effectively the malts and the hop flavors, I had an English yeast which adds its own esters and its own flavors. So I looked at my grain bill, knowing that I hadn't added any hops yet because I'd mashed in, but I wasn't at the point of boiling and adding hops. I looked at that and I thought, okay, if I take away the hops and take away the yeast, what could I reimagine this as? Yeah. And the closest thing I got to was a red ale. And so I was like, well, you know what? It is going to be what it is. But now here's where it gets also a little interesting, right? And this is how, the process can really affect off flavors. But I tasted the beer when it went into the fermenter. I tasted the beer before bottling, and it tasted fine. So I don't think that the infection happened during fermentation. So I also don't necessarily think it was a yeast stress, which can cause a lot of different off flavors. I don't think it was that in this case. I think in this case, I did a double batch of bottling in one day. By the way, terrible idea. Bottling sucks. But also to do 2 batches of beer in one day is an enormous task because you've got to clean, rinse, sanitize, you know, all these things. I think that I got a little bit too into going fast instead of going, you know, doing things properly. And I think when I was cleaning, I didn't rinse properly.
It could be, and again, I feel when you're on the other side, when you're judging at those competitions, you know, 9 times out of 10, you can figure out immediately what went wrong, and it's either, you know, check your temperature, check your sanitation, and it's one of those two almost all the time. At least, you know, for I would say most of your regular styles. Again, things get weird on your sort of edge cases, but it's interesting. You know, you say you were sort of you had this sort of English yeast, because that's a nice segue to diacetyl, diacetyl, whichever way we want to pronounce it. How do we feel about that? And, you know, because it can be acceptable, which I'm air quoting, or it can be very bad depending on what style you're drinking. Like, it can be totally fine, but it can also just be a butter bomb. And actually, Katie, I'm going to start with you, because I see you nodding, and I'm curious what our experiences have been with that kind of popcorn flavor, that buttery.
You know, I would probably drink with a good few like craft beer drinkers, and people go, "Oh, you can taste the diacetyl in this," and I'm like, "The what? Sorry, hang on."
Exactly.
So I like to have a translation. Well, I like, you pick it up, but sometimes I think that it could be intimidating if people use these technically correct words, but maybe in language that isn't very accessible to Joe or Jane soap
100%
soap on the street, you know. So diacetyl is butter, right? Buttery.
Yep.
Would you agree? That's what
butterscotch or buttered popcorn, and you'll find it in a lot of different beers, but it can really be quite prominent in things that are slightly lighter, so without many darker malts. So lagers, if you get a lager with diacetyl, it's almost the exact opposite of the flavor that you're going for. You know, lagers are meant to be crisp and almost dry, and diacetyl adds this kind of slickness and this butteriness. Whereas if you're drinking something like an English bitter, it's not really an off flavor. It shouldn't be over pronounced, but it's allowed to be there in small quantities. So it very much does depend on the style.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those flavors too that some people are really, really sensitive to. Some people barely notice it. Some people really, really pick it up immediately. And I think that's why I have met a sort of certain subgroup of beer nerds who will not drink just like bitters and sometimes English pale ales, because to them they just taste like butter. And there are some, I will say, that do have that tendency, but I feel like we've moved away from that in a lot of ways. But some of those, and I don't want to tar them all with one brush, but like there are certainly some of those kind of older traditional, which again I'm air quoting, sort of family brewers did go into that, but I feel like a lot of them have moved away from those recipes too. I think because of that, it's kind of fallen out of favor, and maybe because it is such a pronounced flavor. So
yeah, and I think back in the 90s, a lot of these off flavors showed up a lot more. I think people have brewers have gotten a lot better at trying to eliminate off flavors and to mitigate against them. And like you were saying, Tandy, a lager, you've got nowhere to hide in a lager. If there's an off flavor, it's going to be there. You know, it's not going to hide behind the hops or in a stout or something where you can hide behind the roastiness. You know, so
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's maybe where we can give people some helpful, buying guides when you're out there. If you're looking at bottled lagers that have been sitting and they kind of look a little dusty on the shelf, maybe you want to give those a pass, because you can get that, first of all, they can be skunked. They can, get that light struck, really skunky flavor, or they can get that wet cardboard flavor, which, even if you get a gorgeous, like Dortmunder export. And I know we were talking about this after our live recording, so thank you everyone who came out for that, but gorgeous, gorgeous beer when it starts out. But if it's been sitting on a shelf with no cold chain, light coming in and just getting kind of old, you may open what was a great beer 8 months ago, and now it just tastes like wet cardboard, and no one wants this. But then if that's your only experience of that beer, you think, oh no, I don't like that. It tastes like wet cardboard. So I think, people need a little bit of education, but equally, if it hasn't been well kept, if you're just picking it up at, your local, I wouldn't even say your off license, but like your local, sort of convenience store, it may not be in the best shape. Now, some do a great job, but you just may want to be
Yeah.
a little, caveat emptor there.
Okay, well, let me take us back a sec, because now you've mentioned two. One is light struck or skunky. And I want to just maybe say, okay, this is what happens when beer is exposed to light. So
Yeah.
hence the name light struck. But the description for this has always confused me a little bit, because for a person that didn't grow up with skunks, I don't think I know what a skunk smells like.
That's a
And
great point.
I have
Same,
no
no
idea.
skunks in Ireland.
No idea. But the other description is catty. So on the one hand, I think I've had light struck beers that remind me a little bit of almost old cat litter or ammonia kind of cat
Yeah.
urine. So I think it's that, but I could be wrong. So I wanted clarification, because I've probably drank a million light struck beers in my life and never known it.
No, you are on the right track. It's absolutely in that kind of ammonia odor family of bad smells. I'm lucky enough to have never been sprayed by a skunk, but I feel like growing up, if you grow up in North America, everyone's got a dog or a cat or some pet that was sprayed by a skunk, and then you have to wash them with tomato juice. And I don't even know if that's real, but that's what I've been told you do. Either that, you have to go and buy a special scrub, because it's awful. You can't get rid of it. And you do definitely notice if there's been a skunk, or if a skunk's been like hit by a car or something. It is very strong. And I don't even think, like, I do think that catty is probably a better descriptor for that particular off flavor, because it's never as overpowering as it is from an actual skunk. But you may kind of sometimes walk past, say, that the room where your litter box is a few meters away and think that could be better. That could be better. But so I think that's maybe a more apt and universal description. So see, we're improving the language.
There we go. It's not skunky, it's catty.
There.
But what is interesting is that, that was the whole reason that people started recommending brown bottles, like the one I've got in the video here, as opposed to green or white, because the brown keeps out the sort of UV rays that can light strike your beer. Is that really the verb?
Why not?
Whereas, a lot of commercial breweries don't really use brown bottles, they'll use green. But there are sometimes reasons. So Heineken has kept their green bottles because they've got, I think it's like an enzyme, or they've done something to their yeast or malt or something that prevents this light struck off flavor. So they've got their light beers in a green bottle that are not supposed to easily get light struck, where ordinarily the advice would be stay away from green and clear bottles. And I think that Corona might have the same thing, but I'm not entirely sure. It could be, knowledge that's handed out within, these large brewing corporations. I'm not sure. But as a home brewer, to avoid that one, just avoid green and clear bottles, and don't leave your beers out like in the sun. Not even just the lids or anything. Just keep your beers in darkness where possible, because that's the best way to prevent it. It's not a difficult one.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, like, I feel like these tend to be different, but, sort of different root causes, I feel like. But also, if you're keeping them dark, they're probably not going to explode, hopefully, unless you've done other bad things with, too much yeast, too much sugar, whatever you've done there.
Unless you keep them in the dark in the hot press.
That then might be problematic. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Although
for those who are not familiar, hot press is hot cupboard, or the cupboard where the boiler is. Hot press is a very Irish way of saying this.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, press. I know press. Yeah. Press is a word that doesn't
But no one else. Yeah.
Didn't travel around the world like other worlds. So yeah, you go, it's like it's in the press, and people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Took me a while.
Yeah, or even to know that like Hot Press magazine, the music magazine, that it means something. It's not just like it's cool in a different way. So
Yes.
But I never even considered that. I just thought it was like hot off the press.
See, that's what I had assumed for years, but I think because there's such a specifically Irish music magazine,
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the acoustics are better in the hot press.
And now I'm looking back at my Brewer's Companion again, and I've noticed again, just going back to the phenolic one for a bit, he does say, he has a corrective action for a lot of these, and I think we'll mention some of these others in a little bit, but for that one, for some of them it's either like no, can't fix it, or some of them it's like wait. So for example, some of the diacetyl or diacetyl, depending on how you like to say it, sometimes it may be absorbed, depending. But when he goes to the phenolic, he says, corrective action, none possible, problem will get worse, bottle may burst, run. So you've all been warned. Although it's interesting though too, especially for the lagers, and I would be curious to see if this actually worked or not, if this is just sort of perception, because talking about the butteriness, if it's gone wrong in your lager, he does say allow lagers to warm up for a few days, then cool back down. But it feels like folk wisdom to me. I wonder if it's real. So does it actually work? It does. Really?
We spoke about this in our lager episode.
And
you're
right.
Yeah. Because I was trying to figure out, did something happen? Someone was supposed to keep them cold and ended up gallivanting somewhere.
Right.
Got distracted. They warmed up, cooled them down, and then they were tasted great or something, and
hey.
So what actually happens is that diacetyl is a naturally produced compound from fermentation. Right. It'll happen almost all the time. But because lagers are fermented cold, your yeast activity, or it needs to be, it can be reabsorbed by the yeast. The yeast will eat it back up, but it needs to be at a warmer temperature. Most ales won't really have that much of a problem with it unless it's coming specifically from that kind of yeast. So in a lager, if you're brewing a lager, what is called a diacetyl rest. Right? You're bottling or keeping, but if you really do have a bottle of lager or a can of lager that is tasted diastole, you can warm it up for a couple of days, but it's got to be quite warm, almost 18, 19 degrees Celsius. For a couple of days, and the yeast should go and eat that and go back down. Now, to be fair, for a lot of the commercial lagers that you're getting out there, they're not going to have a lot of yeast over in the cans or the bottles. So your mileage may vary. But if you are a home brewer and you've done a lager and it's in a bottle, and potentially you've been bottle conditioning it, give it a shot. Don't throw your whole batch away. Absolutely try that.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So the important pro tip for home brewers may not work for, the old, 6-pack of Grolsch you had sitting around, but Yeah. Now I'm curious too about, because I feel like this is one we don't come across anymore, but he talks about ballpoint pen as a specific off flavor, which again sounds kind of like a metallic one to me, but possible cause. And again, this is not one I came across even back when I did my BJCP stuff a long time ago, but he says, probably from old extract syrup, some brands are worse than others. So I wonder if this is just something that we've outgrown as kind of a hobby stroke industry.
But it's like a ballpoint pen. Which end are you tasting when you're tasting? Is it the inky side, or is it the plastic?
That's a good question. It must be the inky side though, because he also says, corrective action, none possible. Make it a spiced beer. A drop of vanilla may smooth it out. So,
it's strange to me because when you said ballpoint pen, I immediately thought the ink side, and I thought maybe it's that kind of hot alcohol-y kind of side, because it's almost
maybe
it's quite a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a volatile alcohol smell. It's almost like it, because I guess a pen, when you're writing with it, the ink dries, but actually it's something else that's evaporating, and it's, I don't even know how this stuff works, but my brain says it's the alcoholic or hot beer that we know of today, and maybe that was also just a different name for it, or it was a subset of it.
Yeah, such an odd one, but there you go. Although I think this is funny too. I know we talked about this. We won't have to go deep into this one, but we talked about, he doesn't say barnyard, but he just say goatee, and just say sweat socks.
You see, I like that. I really like that.
Well, and possible causes, when you get a lactobacillus infection, because once upon a time that was bad, folks. You did not want to have your lactobacillus. People did not want. But it says corrective action, hold your nose when you drink it. Probably will taste good in chili. And I thought, would it though? I mean,
why chili specifically? And if you cross the border into Argentina, would it taste bad again?
Oh, I see what you did there.
I I guess he
goodness.
means chili the dish, not chili the country, right?
He does, but I liked it. But yeah, but again, his usual, next time of sanitize everything, use a wort chiller. Like, okay, these are all things that
These are
make
basic things.
sense. Yeah, but I thought that was fascinating.
If you've got a bit of lactobacillus or a sourness to your beer when it wasn't meant to be there, okay, so either you could lean in,
Right.
and let it go on and be a sour beer and just enjoy it for what it is, or age it further with some Brett or with something else to change it entirely. But actually, that idea of using it in cooking is not that bad, because it's going to add some kind of sour flavor, and acidic stuff complements rich things. Rich fatty things. So
it could work.
I feel like that's not that wrong.
Yeah, it's just an interesting one. Right? I wouldn't have thought of it. I've definitely, though, used homebrew that wasn't quite wrong, but wasn't quite right, if that makes sense, in either baking or in cooking. I want to say we once made a batch of like parkin or some other kind of like traditional baked good that would normally have like molasses and other stuff, and put that in instead of the water.
What did you say, Lisa? Parkin?
Parkin, yes, it's from Yorkshire. You make it for bonfire night over there, and it's lovely and very dark and dense. And
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, you make it with oatmeal and dark treacle, and it can have ginger, but it doesn't have to. But I like it without. But if you make it with beer, like as part of the water, or but it just gives it a nice little extra richness. So I've definitely used like a brown ale that didn't quite work, but wasn't bad, just wasn't good. It can be good for baking. So.
And is it cake-like, or is it more flapjack-like?
Yes. I would say more cake-like. I would say more cake-like, but it also depends. If like me, you're actually not good at making anything in a kitchen, it can turn out more one or the other. But it's if it is good, like when I lived in the north of England, I would just buy it around that time of year, and it's a lovely Halloweeny bonfire nighty thing, and just yummy, but really good with a dark beer. So, but again, that's another thing you can do with a beer that didn't quite work out, is you could put it in your chili, you could bake with it. So
there we go. And I found this flavor wheel, and I think we spoke about the official flavor wheel before, but this is a really nice take, I think, on the flavor wheel, and we're going to link it in the show notes. And it was drawn by Lucy Cook Illustrations for Camera. So and it basically is the flavor wheel that you might know, but it's divided into good and bad.
I like it's very binary. It's like
it is very binary. And then it kind of says, for the bad part, it says, where is the bad flavor coming from? So you have it subdivided into malt, bad storage, bad brewing, and yeast. And then the good flavors are malt, hops, yeast, mixed fermentation. I think it's really nice. And what I like about it is that it's normal words. Like it doesn't say, it says butter. It says cabbage.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. That's always upsetting when that happens. Yeah.
Is it technically cabbage, or is there another?
No,
it's cabbage.
DMS.
Oh, DMS.
It's called
there
DMS.
We go.
So DMS is dimethyl sulfide, and it is a off flavor that often occurs when you're using Pilsner malts in beer. Doesn't mean it's always in Pilsner beers, but a lot of beers use Pilsner malts. And what it can smell like is like cooked cabbage, sometimes cooked corn. Sometimes people will talk about tomato paste as well, almost old tomato paste. Everybody sort of has a slightly different way of doing it, but I find it's got a mixture between a sort of vegetal character and a bit of sulfur, which is why cabbage is often a useful one to know for. And I mean, look, nowadays I think you do get it quite often, but you should also know which styles it's sort of appropriate in. So in a lot of lagers, it is appropriate as long as it's not over the top. Whereas if you're getting that, let's say in an IPA or in a stout, not appropriate. These are not the flavors that are appropriate there. It would be appropriate in small quantities in things like saisons, sometimes maybe even a sour, because they'll have a lot of Pilsner malts. But the thing to do is to boil it for a long time, or as most people do, use Pilsner malt that's been kind of modified in some way to not produce as much DMS. But yeah, cabbage.
There you go. I was, and it is beside ketchup. You were like, it's slightly slightly ketchupy.
Yeah.
And I also like that in the good part with yeast, there's banana, but in the bad part with yeast, there's old bananas.
Oh.
Oh.
So that's the dividing line. So yeah, so your Hefeweizen is a fresh banana, but there's that bad mushy
banana. Yeah.
And a lot of the fruity flavors, you know, I think sort of the divide between whether they're deliberately there on purpose and when they come from hops or some, not really malt, but hops and yeast can give you these kind of fruity flavors. They're called esters. They're undesirable when they're in either the wrong style or when your fermentation temperature has been a bit whack. So for instance, a lot of Hefeweizen or Saison yeasts can change character based on the temperature that you ferment at. So sometimes you'd find a Saison with quite a banana almost flavor, which is not really the way it's meant to be. It's not an off flavor, but it's kind of there. But if you had a banana sort of off flavor in a lager again, that would be inappropriate. If you have it in a Weiss, that's appropriate. It's okay. Now, I don't know if I've ever tasted a beer that's got old banana flavor, but theoretically, I guess it's possible. A lot of the fruits are just esters. Strawberry, pear, banana, apple, grape, citrus. They're all there, but not always good.
Yeah, no, here the banana, bubblegum, pineapple, they're all together here. Possible cause, yeast contaminated with bacteria, fermentation temperature too high, but corrective action, none. Hawaiian Night Special is the is the takeaway. So again, Randy was living his best life back when he wrote this in the 90s. But I think again, like I feel like now you see so many beers that are tropical or and again, how often I guess again we're all a little bit suspicious of some of them. Did they mean to do that, or now we've just branded it and have gone with it, which I do think that's happened in some places. So
definitely. Now I remember back in the 90s, I used to get a soapy feel in my mouth.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that off flavor? What causes it?
That can be a number of things, but most commonly what I've seen is actually why I think that I didn't rinse my bottles correctly for this one. There's a little bit of a film on top of this beer, and I think that is the sanitizer or the cleanser, the cleaner that I didn't quite treat correctly. It can have a number of things that it does to your beer. On the one hand, it could prevent head, like what mine did. On the other hand, it can infect the beer or make it smell medicinal. And the third thing is that it can give you that like slick, kind of soapy mouthfeel, because basically it is a soap. It just is. So
that's interesting. Yeah, it's listed here as beer sat in primary too long, picking up flavors from dead yeast. So that's
there we go. That's another one.
But that could be a combination of things. So
this one also sat in primary too long, so could be both.
Could be both. But yeah, although actually when he does get down to just sourness, because again, sour back in the 90s was bad, universally, just bad. He does say repair unlikely. Use it as a base for a fruit beer, because that could just hide all faults. So that's just
does he say to double dry hop it?
Doesn't say to double dry hop it. I'm afraid that was not mentioned. Although again, like going back to the cardboardy too, he says drink it up as soon as you can. It will only get worse. A lot of these are drink it right now, and then it's like, well, I don't know. I feel like nowadays we might be like, it's okay to drain pour some. You don't have to drink it all. You can diagnose and move on. So
I know, but I do like his attitude. I do like his attitude.
Yes,
he wants to turn a negative into a positive in some way.
Absolutely. And I think there is a lot to be said for that. You don't want to waste things. If there's some other way you can put it to use, that's all good. But it's just fascinating. And again, just one of these for the beer nerds of today is haze is also here as just a very bad thing. No haziness in your beer, folks. Just terrible.
Look, so. I think I'm in agreement with that. With what was the name of the guy? Werner.
Oh, it's Randy Mosher.
Oh,
Mosher. I'm never quite sure how you actually say his surname, but he's
Randy.
still around, kicking, doing all sorts of beer writing, beer judging, all of that good stuff. So yeah, it's just very interesting to see all these things that used to be very bad that are now fine. But now let's talk about some of those that I don't know that there's a way to resurrect some of them yet, at least in terms of like selling it. So like one is here like cideriness, or I think of the vinegar kind of flavor we talked about, kind of the other day. I'm like, I can't see the broader market suddenly deciding those are cool, but you never know. But I feel like, some of these are just bad, and it's okay to say, you know what, something went wrong, figure out what it was, and move on.
I mean, if you're getting something that's sour, I think the only distinction you should try and make if you're trying to diagnose your own beer is, is it sour like acetic acid, as in like vinegar, or is it sour more like citric acid, which is more like a grapefruit or an orange, really citrusy, or is it more like a yogurt sourness or a kimchi sourness, which is lactic from lactobacillus?
No.
The only reason why I say to try and distinguish between those two is that if you've got acetic acid, your problem is probably that air got in, because that bacteria grows with oxygen, whereas the other kinds grow anaerobically, so that's without oxygen. So you may just have slightly different problems if you've got them, but if you've got sourness in a beer that's not meant to be sour, yeah, that's an off flavor.
No. Definitely.
So some of these other descriptions was just unpleasant alcohol, which I suppose would cover the ballpoint pen.
Yeah.
Yes. And that one is kind of more technically called alcoholic or hot. And now look, not every beer, again, it's not going to be super relevant to every single beer, but every beer's got a little bit of an alcohol flavor. But and especially the higher ABV beers. So if you're talking now barley wines and imperial stouts, they are going to feel and taste hotter and warmer to you as they go down, and that's because they've got a higher amount of alcohol. But what sometimes does happen is that your yeast is so strained when it's trying to ferment that it gives off these kind of hot alcohols in styles that don't really demand it. There's no reason that a 5% beer should ever taste hot or alcoholic, besides the very normal, usual, slightly alcoholic warmth and booziness going down. So yeah, often that's got to do with like yeast health, checking your fermentation temperature, using fewer adjuncts, and making sure that you've oxygenated your wort, and all of the kind of other basics. But I think the thing to know is that it can be slightly more acceptable the higher ABVs, and down at the lower end, no good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's always a real mark of skill when you can get one of these really strong barley wines, like you get maybe for Christmas or something, where it's like, 9, 10, 11%, but it tastes like a beer that might be 6 or 7%. And it's got that there, but you don't get that immediate kind of heat from it. But again, which is not to say that's always wrong, especially at those higher ABVs, it can be absolutely fine. But when that's not the first thing you get, you're like, oh, this is special. This has been really well crafted. And it's just it's just always a nice, sort of holiday treat still. And I know it's, still dry January for some people, but
I think dry January might have been last month. By the time this comes out.
Could be.
And we can say, I hope you all had a happy Burns night and welcomed in the year of the rabbit.
Here. Yeah. That's an interesting question. And I don't know the answer to this question, but thinking about like, what are kind of off flavors for your non-alcoholic beers? Because I think they have such a different, potentially like, I don't know, sort of flavor profile. Because I think the ones I don't like the old ones tended to just taste very like wort, very sort of sweet.
Witty, yeah.
And now they've gotten a lot better, that the really good ones don't have that. But I wonder, will that count, or will that come to be seen as kind of an off flavor? Because I think these things do evolve, but I don't know.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think worty on one end and then just watery and on the other, like
definitely. And yet again, now there are some that are quite good that don't have that kind of flavor, like your Guinness Zero, and some of those athletic brewing ones I found are quite good, but it's still I feel like it's still the exception more than the real
Yeah.
rule, that they really do taste more like a traditional beer. But I wonder, like, will that category evolve to have this broad range of sort of faults, if you like? So I don't know.
It's
That is very interesting.
So like in 2030, they'll be looking back, oh my God, 2023. Remember when we thought such and such was an off flavor?
Yeah,
Wurtiness. Now you can't get it. Can't get enough of it.
It is weird because that sort of wurtiness, that flavor, that unfermented, sugars, I've seen that before in places where it's considered off flavors, but I haven't seen it for a long time in all of the official sort of BJCP lists.
Yeah.
I think because it's not as much an off flavor as it is just a bit of a fault. If you've got a beer that tastes that way, as if it's just a bit unfermented, a bit too sweet for the style, you'd get marked down, but it's not going to be considered an off flavor as much as a comment to say, hey man, brew it, ferment for longer, or do something just to make it not so sweet. But yeah, don't know. But as for the non-alcoholics, I wonder if they'll have to be judged per style, as in, a non-alcoholic stout in air quotes versus an IPA versus a lager. Because if they are judged by the same standards as their alcoholic counterparts, that would be really interesting too.
Definitely. Yeah. And that, again, as that category has really been picking up steam, I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Will they eventually taste the same? I mean, who knows? That would be pretty cool. So,
well, I mean, yeah, there's sounds like there's an awful lot of interesting yeasts from interesting places out there.
yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. It's a good subject for a future episode too. Some of these strange yeasts that are floating around out there.
Yeah.
So
apart from the lacto and the sour ones, we won't go there again. Jesus, that was enough now.
No more triannuary for you.
I've had oh look, I think I went a bit too far. I was like, okay, look, I can handle this, but I couldn't. So for me, it's an off flavor, but it was meant to be there. So it's not really an off flavor.
Yep.
It's just something I don't like the taste of.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is fair.
And that's different from an off flavor because,
yes.
Yeah, me just not liking something doesn't mean it's badly brewed or it's not to style. It just means my personal flavor.
Exactly. Like Ralph Beer and me, we are never going to get along. That smoke is meant to be there. It's not for me, and that's okay. Other people love it, and that's all good. It's there for them. So something for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting though, because I think if we talk about how do you know it's an off flavor versus a beer you don't like, versus any other kind of way that this might happen, because I think that it's not just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's an off flavor.
Definitely.
And I think it shouldn't really be up to the consumer to have the kind of knowledge to be able to name these off flavors all the time.
Definitely.
And I think that you should be educated enough to maybe just have a Google search. If you can pinpoint the flavor, you say, you know what, it tastes a bit like celery or cabbage, and then okay, maybe I've got vegetal, or maybe I've got something. Maybe it's an off flavor, maybe it isn't. Not sure. But if you can pinpoint the flavor, you at least can do a quick search and say, all right, is it possible or is it not? And if it's not really listed, then you figure that it's probably something that you don't like. But there are, very interestingly, some ingredients taste different to people. So different hops taste different to people. So famously, I don't like Euconaut. It used to be called Equinox, because to me it tastes like green pepper or green capsicum to Aussies, anyone Aussie listening. And I really can smell it and I can taste it, and I'm like, Equinox or Euconaut, I hate it. I'm not going near it. And some people find that specific hops just taste like onion, or all these kinds of weird flavors. So and it's not to say that it's not there, because all hops, especially hops, have got a spider diagram of their flavors. And it's not to say that onion isn't there. It's just that it's not really perceptible by a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And on balance, it works on its other flavors. So
it's just like the celery cucumber. It's like some small segment of the population can't eat a cucumber because it tastes horrible to them. And then another small segment can't eat celery because it tastes horrible. And I am in the celery ban camp. I hate celery. I can't stand it. How about you? Can you taste cucumber and celery?
Oh, I'll say I'm not a big fan of either one, but I may be strange. So I am strange. There's no maybe about it. So I don't know why I'm like.
That's why we love you, Lisa.
There you go. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan. Although I've been able to sort of come around to cucumber a bit in something, but I still don't want to eat it on its own or like sliced. But I don't mind it as a bit of a flavor in something like in a cocktail or something, but not if it's the main flavor. But I just don't love the texture of them either. So I think there's also there's a texture thing that I don't like for celery or cucumber because I'm still picky, even though I'm much better. But there you go. But yeah, and then we could go down the whole cilantro, rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But
cilantro, coriander, it's a whole nother thing. I like all the things. Although I must say raw celery, I'm not crazy about, but cooked is perfectly fine. Happy with it. I love cucumber. Absolutely love it.
I do love a good cucumber, I will say.
Yeah, not a big fan of either one. But again, I'm strange. And again, in a cocktail, I'll deal with it. I'll power through. So anyway, with that, I think we'll leave it there for now. But I don't know. Anyone have a sort of parting thought about sort of off flavors? I think we've got a good sort of mantra of it might be an off flavor, or it might be something that's just not to your taste, and they're both okay. But of course, if you're a home brewer or professional brewer, go identify those off flavors and don't do that. So.
Yeah, I think sometimes the biggest off flavor comes from what's written on the can rather than what's in the can.
That is a good thought. Yeah. So we'll try to. It just didn't make any sense. Sorry, we have to go back to it. I don't know. Yeah, try. And again, English is not everyone's first language, of course, but run it by someone. Yeah. An extra pair of eyes in all circumstances is good. We'll leave it at that. So I will say, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up off flavors. But again, I would say, I know it's been a couple weeks now, but thanks to those of you who came out to see us at Rascals, you'll probably run into us in various places all around Ireland as we're popping up at beery things here and there, whether in a group or solo. So do come up and say hi. We love to have a chat. Always good. Thank you again for following us on all the socials at Beerladies Pod, and go to our link tree. You can actually support us. You can buy us a pint. You could buy some merch, and you'd look super cool in some nice Beerladies threads. Just saying. But again, we really, really appreciate all you guys listening, liking, sharing, subscribing. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye.